everyone. I'm David Singleton, and as you've heard, I'm the CTO at Stripe, where I look after our engineering and design teams as we build economic infrastructure for the internet. And I'm really excited to be with you all today. If you're not familiar with Stripe, our mission is to increase the GDP of the internet by helping businesses of all sizes, from entrepreneurs to large enterprises, start, run, and scale their businesses online. And we got started with a developer-centric online payments API, which is now scaled to serve millions of businesses around the world. And we also now do much more, providing economic infrastructure for many of the most innovative and the fastest growing companies in the world. And like many businesses around the world, things have looked a bit different at Stripe these past 6 months. Many more businesses have been seeking to shift their operations online in the wake of COVID. And that's meant that our team has had to work really hard to meet that increased demand. And we've also transitioned Stripe to be entirely remote, a model that most of us weren't prepared for, or at least we weren't entirely prepared for. And while I'm sure most, if not all of you have experienced a similar transition, I hope our experience is interesting to you. So we've had remote engineers since the very early days of Stripe. And in May 2019, we made a really deliberate decision to treat remote the same way as any of the primary physical offices that we've invested in around the world. And we launched our remote hub to better support and formalize our growing base of remote engineers. And while we'd actually begun hiring remote engineers back in 2013, we then mostly focused on growing our engineering hubs as offices in San Francisco, Seattle, Dublin, and Singapore. And having a remote hub means doing all the same things we did to invest in making those offices successful for our remotes. So as we started hiring more remote engineers, the value of a more remote workforce that's closer to our customers really quickly became clear. But we also knew that we had to make sure that remote employees felt supported so that everyone could reap the benefits of being a partially distributed company. So we did a lot. We analyzed company-wide communication norms. We studied the most effective team structures. We observed the experiences of office-based managers who were managing remote Stripes. And we've learned, I think, a lot about what makes remote work work. And the foundations we'd built in the years leading up to 2020 couldn't have fully prepared us for this year, but they were instrumental in enabling us to operate as we have these last 6 months. And today, I'd like to share some of the lessons we've learned to help guide remote working strategies, lessons that I hope will serve you in today's world, as well as in a more distributed future. So first, let's take a step back. It's important to know how we build products at Stripe. And at Stripe, our users are central to everything we do. And in our case, what we mean by users is the businesses who build on Stripe. As an infrastructure company, all the impact that we make on the world comes via and in partnership with them, whether that's helping Shopify make a world-class e-commerce solution available to small businesses around the world, or helping Udacity teach lifelong learners the skills they need. We work really hard to develop really deep relationships with our users, and those relationships are critical in helping us determine both what products we decide to build and exactly how we build them. So when we hear about repeated themes of profound business need from our users, we see that as our invitation to go and build the next layer in our economic infrastructure. And that's at the center of every single product we've built over the years. A nice example of this is Stripe Connect. Connect is our product for platforms and marketplaces. And the ideas behind Connect came from working with early Stripe users like Lyft and Shopify, who as early stage startups themselves back then were building on our payments API. But we heard from them and many others that building a platform involves a ton of heavy lifting, and we built Connect to help. And then companies like Kickstarter were able to use Connect to create global marketplaces while focusing their engineering efforts on only what was truly unique about their business. So from a product development perspective then, our users are critical to informing what we build and the needs that we solve for. And the overarching principle we use to work this way at a team-by-team level is ensuring that we have a rapid iterative development loop with the right customers. And I could easily devote this entire talk to that topic, but I'll do my best to keep it relevant to today's discussion. Understanding who your users are requires gathering a lot of information, but it starts with getting to know their desires and their use cases, getting to know them as people. What are they actually trying to do? And Identifying actual people you know experiencing the problem you seek to solve is really important here. They will then help guide the development of the product. But also your feedback loops must be quick. You must be able to get changes into the hands of a user who actually cares about them within a day. And then that conversation enables ongoing action from both sides to enable a fast rate of product improvement. And that's what creates valuable quality products in the long run. And what we noticed early on in having a robust distributed engineering workforce was how key they were to helping us build and shape great products. In being closer to our users and present in cities outside of our major hubs where we had offices, our remotes brought different users' perspectives and took note of the way purchasing practices and payment methods varied by place, or how internet speeds or unreliable connections alter consumer behavior. And this leads me to my first lesson, which is empathy. Remote work builds empathy for your users and your customers, but also critically within your organization. So being closer to your customers helps build empathy. Over a year ago, when the majority of our engineering staff was located in 2 cities, it was more difficult to support a global user population with products that felt locally relevant to them. And when we thought about this, more than 99.75% of engineers in the world live outside of San Francisco and Seattle, which is where we had offices. And by tapping into engineering talent based outside of major tech hubs, we were able to be closer to many more users. So take Chicago, for example. By having Stripes on the ground, we've been able to power and learn from some really interesting and innovative businesses there, such as Neon One, whose software helps more than 3,000 nonprofits operate more effectively. Printavo, which specializes in helping print shops manage their operations. And ShipBob, a company I've used myself, which handles logistics and fulfillment for online retailers. And thinking more globally, our developer support engineering team is now distributed across 3 continents, and 2/3 of the team operates outside in normal times of a Stripe office. Units within that team own one of 4 coverage areas, each one spanning approximately 6 time zones. So for a global distributed workforce, time zones really matter. And that enables them to provide more timely local support to users, as well as run uniform, simultaneous, and regionally resonant customer events all around the world. So we feel closer to our customers because we literally are. And this shift has markedly influenced our product development roadmaps. One key area that we've made substantial improvements to is supporting non-credit card payment methods throughout our product suite. Back in the day, we referred to those internally as alternative payment methods, because from the perspective of someone sitting in San Francisco, that's how they feel. However, for a lot of our global users, credit cards themselves are the alternative. So we've built better payment method support faster by building empathy with our users outside of the US. And from an internal perspective, we've learned a lot from our remotes about how to operate effectively and efficiently while being distributed, while also having empathy for each other as we grow and take on new challenges. So putting together all those things we learned, we invested substantially in internal tooling and explicit communication norms to support the productivity of remote engineers. The screenshot you're looking at here is something that we call Home. And Home is our internal intranet that provides Stripes with information about what's happening at the company. We've also invested in making everyone's profile page here a great way to get to know them and give insight into whether they're working, relaxing, or sleeping right now. And something that we heard a lot of companies struggle with is how to recognize the impact of people who may not be so visible every day in this remote working mode. So we try to do a tremendous amount of recognition via email and docs and various async channels. And Home also serves as a place to recognize the ongoing work of Stripes across the entire company. We showcase recent ships and fixes that individuals have made, not only on the homepage, but also on individual Stripes pages, as you can see here for me. And when it comes to communicating remotely, we believe that meetings are precious. They're shared synchronous time together. But we also think that recurring meetings are suspicious. Any group which meets can typically actually get more done by taking the same time to work asynchronously in a shared document. So we think about them a lot. We've also built a lot of tooling on top of Slack to coordinate things that used to happen in person. For instance, to coordinate deploys for our very most sensitive systems. But maybe the best example of this is our incident management tooling. And you can see a screenshot of this right here. As recently as last year, we'd still make really frequent use of physical war rooms during incidents. But we built this tooling, which rapidly spins up a virtual response room across Slack channels that have tools in them. And that provides a lot of support for operational workflows directly in Slack. And our incident response has improved a lot. And I don't think we'll ever go back to the old way. We've also applied the lessons from our remote engineers to the rest of the company working remotely during COVID. So we've always had a document-centric decision-making culture at Stripe, and that's working well for us right now. We're embracing templates as we evolve this. So these are standardized models that are effective for communicating information across teams, and in certain cases across the company. And you can iterate on these and make the whole process better over time. It encourages rigorous documentation process. It allows for better asynchronous information exchange, and it lowers the barrier to long-form communication. We also encourage Stripes really early on, and we've been onboarding everyone who's joined this year remotely. We encourage Stripes early on to identify and fill gaps where they see them. In other words, if you don't find what you need, create it. And as a friend and colleague said recently to me, write the documentation you want to see in the world. We've also established norms to help make meetings count. So remote work really does rely heavily on meetings, given the lack of serendipitous run-ins in the office or spontaneous stand-ups. But as our non-remotes had learned before, Zoom fatigue is real. So to make meetings count, we encourage everyone to set an agenda and to take clear notes. But we also, as I mentioned, encourage everyone to evaluate the necessity of meetings, especially recurring ones. Could it be an email? Could it be a document? And if it isn't providing value, just let it go. We also, in aid of making sure that happened across the whole company, this year we made Wednesday a company-wide no meeting day, and it's working really well for us. Next, we invest in internal social infrastructure. So I care, we all care, that all of our Stripes have a successful experience at Stripe. And to gauge this, we used to run surveys twice a year. And in the latest one of those, we find that compared to non-remote employees, remote Stripes are more likely to have a sense of connection to their team. They're more likely to balance their workload and life demands, and they're more likely to stay longer at Stripe. And since COVID arrangements have produced a lot of change this year, we actually stepped up the frequency of a shorter pulse survey to every couple of weeks. And the results from the first couple of months of COVID really surprised us. They showed that people felt just as connected to Stripe and more connected to their team than they were before. And they were also still able to get important work done. And like I said, we were actually quite surprised by the results of this survey, but we attribute it to a few key actions that we've taken. First of all, fewer in-person meetings can make it difficult to acknowledge people and their efforts. So celebration of impact via shipped emails, in team Slack channels, as well as on home became even more important. We've also long had a Slack bot called Donut that pairs people in shared channels. And while we typically used to use that for grabbing lunch in the office, we find that it translated quite easily to setting up virtual coffee chats. And that's been used a ton this year to help keep connections across the distributed team. And while it's been and it continues to be a work in progress, we've found ways to maintain community at Stripe, whether that's at the team or at the company level. A common practice at the team level is hopping on the Zoom call a couple minutes before team meetings start, or hanging out for a few minutes even as folks trickle off to jump onto other calls. And that serves as a way for folks to catch up a bit more casually, sometimes prompting them to schedule additional time or chat about other things, often not related to the meeting which just happened. So it's kind of like gathering around the coffee machine before a meeting in the office. And as one team picked that up and found it really good, we had that spread across the rest of the company. Another example, we've actually seen shifts happen in the way Stripes engage in company-wide meetings. Our mostly weekly Q&A used to be attended by mostly new Stripes, but it's now become our company-wide watering hole. And as a result, we recently added a virtual happy hour at the suggestion of folks in one of those sessions. so that folks can continue their conversations after that big meeting ends. And we've learned, honestly, completely to our surprise, that it is possible to do a Zoom call with over 1,000 people and have it be fun and not chaotic. Now, before Shweta joins me on stage to help me answer some of your questions, I'd like to remind us all that despite the lessons we learned from our remote hub and the years that preceded it, the shift to a completely distributed workforce at Stripe wasn't easy either. But the lessons of the last several months set us up to better support our users and Stripes as we navigate a new and often changing normal. The importance of digital tools and social infrastructure has been amplified over the past few months, and that's exciting. But at Stripe, no one should lose sight of the context that that's happening in. I think this goes for all of us across our industry. As I look back on this year, what ultimately prepared us for the abrupt transition to taking the company fully remote was Stripe's ongoing commitment to having empathy for both our users and for each other. So thanks again to the folks at Plato for having me today. I hope you've enjoyed this short talk. And without further ado, I'm excited to have Shweta Saraf, who's VP Engineering at Packet, join me on stage to help answer questions.
Hey, David, thank you so much for your wonderful tips on remote working and how Stripe went through that journey. I'm Shweta Saraf, VP of Central Engineering at Packet, where we are building the bare metal cloud. I'm really excited to be here to get to all your burning questions. So the first question I have actually is one of mine. As you went through this journey to get to a remote first environment, right? What were some of the positives or lessons you learned from working with your customers who are probably going through the same journey themselves at the same time?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, first of all, I think we're pretty fortunate because we had launched the Remote Hub a year before, and we've published a bunch of stuff that we learned from that on our blog, which, by the way, check it out if you'd like to pick up on some of the tips that I just shared. So quite a lot of our customers, our users, actually reached out in the very early days and said, "Hey, we know you've been doing this for a while. What can we learn from you?" And that was cool because it created a space for the kind of conversation that we're going to have right now. And that's been good. But the thing that's actually been most amazing from my perspective is it's actually brought me a lot closer to our users. Now, I like to think that I was pretty close to our users already, but the way that we would typically connect with customers is we'd bring them into our office for lunch, or I'd go meet, we all would go meet with folks wherever they were. And travel time adds up. It's not always that easy to fit all of these things in. And so what I've found is that for myself and a lot of other folks that I talk to at Stripe, I'm actually able to jump around between Zoom meetings all day long. A lot of them with users and customers, and then a lot of them internal. And actually reducing the barrier to getting together has been really awesome. So I mean, thinking just about yesterday, I started my day with a call with a customer who are based in Europe. I then had a bunch of internal meetings. Around lunchtime, I spent some time with a user that are based here in the US. And I could never have done that before. So I think that there's a lot that's great and that we should take advantage of, and the fact that we can all kind of teleport around the world and travel at the speed of light, even though time zones are still a big issue.
Yeah, definitely. I think we couldn't have imagined a world like this, right? Even if we landed here with some extreme circumstances. So I know our audience have a lot of questions, and I'm gonna get started with some of the questions that are coming in. So the one question on everyone's mind seems to be like, you mentioned that, when it comes to user feedback, like how do you prioritize user feedback and decide which feedback to focus on for your work?
This is a great question. I actually did a panel at the end of the day yesterday with some fast-growing companies. And this was a question that was coming up. Some of them said, oh, we've got this great system where we put all the user feedback into a spreadsheet and we rank it. And then the ones that have the most kind of citations or the most votes are the ones that we pick off first. But they were saying, and we're kind of struggling with that because it kind of means that we jump around all over the place. So what we've learned at Stripe really is what I was saying during the talk, which is it's really important when you're working on any particular product or set of features to figure out who are the users that represent the folks that are going to care about this the most. So identify a small set of the right users. And of course, the way that you get there is by looking at that aggregated feedback. But then it's all about actually developing deep relationships with those particular people as humans, as folks that have, wants and needs and desires and problems. And then you have the opportunity to actually talk to them about what you're thinking of doing and get a really tight feedback loop. And what we do is we really focus on making sure that we choose the right small number of users, and then it's a conversation, like listening to everything they say and iterating together with them, and putting things that are unpolished or not ready or still quite early in front of folks to get their feedback. So that's what we do at Stripe. It's what we will continue to do. I think it's working pretty well for us, and maybe that'll work for some of the folks on the call.
Yeah, no, that's a great way of getting your customers involved in building the product that they truly enjoy, right? So the next question is from Arun, and he wants to know, what strategies do you use to resolve conflicts within the team when they are all remote?
I think there are kind of a couple of different ways of looking at this. We don't have a lot of we don't see a lot of interpersonal conflict, but we have plenty of times where folks disagree about the right path forward. And what we have found in this kind of remote mode is not completely different than being in offices, right? So I mentioned during the talk that at Stripe we've had a document-centric decision-making culture for a long time. And that is, I think, my number one tip when folks are having trouble agreeing on the path forward, which is make sure that it's written down. And make sure that each, constituency in that potential disagreement actually understand where the other one's coming from. And very often when writing things down, that just emerges fairly naturally because you're kind of forced to lay out in logical order your thinking. And oftentimes when there's a conflict, it's actually a misunderstanding where some piece of data was missing. And then we've actually formalized that at scale. So sometimes it's definitely the exception rather than the norm, but sometimes two teams, for instance, will feel differently about the right way forward in a particular direction. And we have formalized the idea that if you don't quickly agree, you can use something called our unblock process, which is where both teams contribute to a document that lays out the problem and lays out the alternatives that they've considered. And then they're encouraged to send that to someone who's sort of responsible for the whole thing to make a decision and then move on once we've made a decision. And this has actually been super valuable for us. Number one, it works well. It means that you've seen both sides. But actually, the vast majority of those documents don't actually end up getting escalated. Just the process of going through the writing down really helps resolve any disagreements. And that's something that I know is being used at other companies pretty successfully too. So I think it, at this point, is known to work pretty well.
Right. That's a great insight. And I think it keeps a record of things too, right? When new people join the team, they know the rationale of why some decisions were made. So that's excellent. So I guess we can move on to the next question. Mozamil wants to know, how frequent does your remote teams meet face-to-face? And are they even doing that right now, considering COVID?
Yeah, so considering COVID right now, we're not meeting face-to-face, and we've gone through a fairly rigorous process of figuring out just would it be safe to, and we've concluded that in the vast majority of places in the world that we operate, it wouldn't yet. Obviously, we keep a close eye on that, and that might change at some point. But that's the mode that we've been in since March. But thinking back to before COVID, it is the case that we find that it's valuable to have our remote teams meet from time to time. So we encourage all remote teams to meet all of them together in person at least twice a year. So once a year we do that actually as a whole company. So towards the end of the year, we'll spend a week basically all converging on one place. And among that, we have just the teams that are remote actually all get together and spend a ton of time together. And then we also encourage them to do that one other time through the year. And those meetings are important, like forming personal connection. Really helps build that empathy I talked about for bringing it back to the work every day. And so that's why we've been so intent in this mode where we're all on Zoom and figuring out what are the things that can replace that and can keep that spirit of personal connection. I'll mention one thing that I didn't say during the talk, which is a lot of our teams have now very vibrant kind of slightly social Slack channels, separate from the one where they do work so that it doesn't all get mixed up together. And the design team, which I spend a lot of time with, have a very vibrant one. And something that they've started doing is actually organizing a meeting about once every 2 weeks where folks come and present to everyone else on something that's not work related, that they're passionate about. It can be anything at all. And I'm actually looking forward to doing one myself next week on winemaking, which is something I got into last year. But the point is, like, it's not work, but it helps foster those bonds that you often get by spending time together face to face.
Love those fun Slack channels, and we'll take you up on your winemaking class anytime, David. So I guess this is one of the other questions that people really want to know. Like you mentioned about team structures at Stripe. Can you tell us a bit more about what's your rationale into how you compose these teams and structures?
Yeah, so at Stripe, we don't have a separate engineering org and product org. We have product and engineering together. But then we have some orgs that support like design and data science that work across all of the teams. So that's one thing to know about the structure. And then at the team level, we do think that there is a sweet spot in terms of team size. I think of this as 7 ± 2, and that includes product and engineering folks that work together. Mm-hmm. So we really strive to keep all of our teams at that kind of size, which means that if the team is working on a mission that involves needing to have more people than that, we'll find a way to subdivide the mission so that we can have teams that remain at that kind of size. And that means we also try to be very precise about what is it that this team does? Like, what is the mission? What are the metrics that they're going to look at to judge their success over time? And we write that down as well, which probably doesn't surprise you. And we find that structure is working well for us, both at our current scale and has worked at much earlier scale as well.
That's great, like having product and engineering together, so there is no room for any miscommunication. So you mentioned about no meeting Wednesdays, right? And that is something we are seeing is being adopted elsewhere. So Adam wants to know, how do you make sure that this policy is respected? Because at times people will just tend to break this policy when schedules get filled up.
Yeah, it's a great question. So first of all, this is new for us this year. So it's not, I only have 6 months-ish worth of data to report, but it is working very well. And we have honestly been skeptical of company no meeting days in the past because we'd heard exactly this feedback from other companies that had them. And so we reflected on, well, how are we just going to make sure that this works? And we decided that it starts with leaders at the company. And I mean, JB explained earlier how everyone's a leader in many cases. That's true. But it's often the case that, for instance, if myself as CTO would put a meeting on someone's calendar, they're just going to come along, right? So it's actually really important that I observe no meeting Wednesday. And say to other leaders at the company, it's important that you observe this as well. And so we've done that. So in fact, Patrick, who's our CEO, was the person that announced to the company that we were going to do this. We were actually quite intentional about telling everyone this is an experiment. It's going to be pretty important that it actually shows value to preserve it. So I really work hard to make it useful or not. And it was useful, so we've kept it.
Great. So I guess maybe we have time for one or two more questions. So talking about time zones, right? Like, how do you really handle the offset when it comes to like a company-wide meeting or Q&A of this sort?
Yeah, another great question. So for the company-wide Q&A, number one, we video record it, which means that folks, and we don't expect that everyone is there in their own time zone. I mean, if you are in India, for instance, there's no really good time in San Francisco that matches to your workday. So we try to make everything accessible to folks who can't be there during their own time zone. And one of the things that we find for some meetings is, saying it's going to be video recorded can kind of change the tone a little bit. So for quite a lot of meetings where we want them to be casual, we'll say there's going to be a video, but we're going to delete it again in a week, which means that you can just kind of be quite, just like meeting in person, right? So that works well. Also for these standing meetings, we actually move them around in the calendar. So it's not like they're at 5 p.m. Pacific every week. We'll move them between 9 a.m. Pacific, which is great for folks in Europe, and 5 p.m. Pacific, which is great for folks in APAC, which also means having to move them to Thursdays in Pacific time zone so that it's still a work day for folks who are in Asia. So That's what we do. And I don't know of a better way. If anyone knows of a better way, let me know.
No, that I think that's great. Like having that casual way of deleting them after a week, so you have access, but you don't feel like this is too formal. So thank you, David. I know we are running out of our time at this moment, but thank you for your great insights and this talk, and thanks to Team Plato for this wonderful platform for us to elevate everyone here who's attending. Thank you.
Thank you, Shweta, and I hope you all have a great day.